Kicking off at number 5, the Divine Wind. And this one in particular is such a tale of historical significance that we just have to talk about it purely from an etymological perspective. Because you know that we all love words, right? Well, for those of you that do know, the term kamikaze actually translates to divine wind in Japanese, which is pretty metal anyway, but the actual reason behind that is something else entirely. Now, over in the rich and intricate history of Asia, the Mongol Empire are a pretty big deal, although they are more inexplicably tied to the ancient kingdom of China than ancient Japan. However, that is not to say that the Japanese didn't have their own Mongol horde to face down. It's just, well, something incredibly interesting happened, and not only once, but twice. Let me explain. In 1274, Kublai Khan of the Mongol Empire sent a massive navy to conquer Japan with an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 men made up of Chinese and Korean warriors, as well as the highly feared Mongol troops. The navy set off in the autumn of that year, harrying the northern coastal islands of Kyushu. However, once the main fleet arrived and began to anchor in Hataka Bay, as the legend goes, a force of nature struck. A divine wind, a huge typhoon, emerged from the depths of the ocean, sinking a third of the Mongol fleet and sending the rest of them home. It was certainly a force of nature, and it saved the Japanese ultimately from ruin. But the same thing happened again, to everyone's divine amazement. Not happy with his failure, Kublai Khan sent a second fleet several years later in 1281, comprised of over 4,500 vessels and some 140,000 men. Again, sailing in August, the fleet made the once familiar voyage toward Japan, and again, this time, the divine wind struck once more. I mean, obviously there is a pinch of salt needed to this, as is the formation of a Japanese legend, but the symbology alone is startling. Again, the fleet was devastated by a far more powerful typhoon than the last, and over half of the evading force was cast into the bay, perishing in the violent waters of the Pacific. The divine wind, which once again, as the legend tells it, saved Japan from the Mongol Empire. However, there is a caveat to this story. During their time preparing for the second Mongol invasion, a 20-kilometer wall was ordered to be constructed as a means of defense. Despite holding off the Mongol Empire down to the divine act of the wind, the construction of this wall absolutely crippled the kingdom economically, ultimately leading to the shogunate's downfall. Maybe there's a lesson there. Coming in at number 4, Yosuke. And I'm gonna be honest guys, this one is so awesome, and why there hasn't been a movie made about it yet is anyone's guess. But hold that thought, because actually, as of this year, rumours have stirred that a one Chadwick Boseman, aka the Black Panther himself, will be playing the first African samurai in history. Really, the epic tale of Yosuke, whilst being a startling reminder of the time, is also one of the most incredible moments in history, and it is a story that just needs to be told. You see, in 1579, a Jesuit missionary by the name of Alessandro Valigno brought an African slave of unknown origin with him on his travels to Japan. Now, historical records aren't exactly clear as to where he was born, but it has been proposed that he may have been from Mozambique, Angola, Ethiopia, or perhaps even Portugal. His real name too is not known, but as far as Japanese records are concerned, they called him Yosuke, believed to be a phonetic approximation of his real name, which was possibly Yasufe or Isaac. Whilst on their travels through the kingdom, Yosuke was eventually called to an audience with Oda Nobunaga, the most powerful Japanese warlord of the time, who was captivated by Yosuke's strength and size, and was so awestruck by this figure from a foreign land that he made him his personal retainer and bodyguard. And well, from then on, Yosuke pretty much pursued the path of the warrior in Japanese society, and he was pretty damn good at it, eventually learning the language and often speaking fluently with the warlord as a trusted counsel. In 1581, Yosuke was elevated to the rank of samurai and stationed at Nobunaga's stronghold and crowning glory, Azuchi Castle, where he served by his side as his personal sword bearer. Eventually, when Nobunaga was later betrayed by Akechi Mitsuhide and his army, a huge battle erupted at Honnoji in Kyoto, where Yosuke stood side by side with the samurai warriors, willing to fight to the death. Sadly, they were defeated, and after, Nobunaga was forced to commit seppuku, ceremonial suicide. Yosuke escaped, however, and briefly served under Nobunaga's son, until he too was attacked by Mitsuhide and committed suicide. Eventually, Yosuke surrendered his sword to the pursuing warlord, and unaccustomed to a samurai surrendering rather than ceremonial seppuku, he ordered Yosuke to return to the Jesuit mission in Kyoto. After that, Yosuke's fate is unclear. He seemingly faded back into the sands of time, where only his legend remained. And hopefully an awesome movie.
Number 3 on this list is Stonehenge. Stonehenge is very similar to the pyramids, having been built roughly 5,000 years ago and being so difficult to construct that people think some sort of paranormal events must have transpired. Located in Wiltshire, England, Stonehenge is a monument that features massive stones standing vertically that weigh roughly 25 tons. That's 50,000 pounds of weight that these monstrous stones have to them. The monument is oriented towards the sunrise on the summer solstice, but other than that, not a lot of people know why it's there or what its purpose was. Now it is owned by the Crown and considered a heritage site, but still people wonder, why was it put there in the first place? Some theories involve its effect on sound waves. When two people are playing a pipe and you walk around the stones, then you'll notice an effect where they cancel each other out. Some people have even chalked it up as being an ancient sex symbol, believe it or not. However, the most popular theory is similar to the pyramids in believing that it's aliens. I tend to believe aliens were capable of this more than the periods, to be honest. They are certainly arranged in a strange fashion and they have no set purpose. How is it possible for humans to lug stones that are 50,000 pounds to a location where there aren't that many stones to begin with? Stonehenge just screams like the sort of place where something paranormal happened, in my opinion. Number 2 on this list is Jesus. I feel like this wouldn't be a complete list if I didn't include one of the most mysterious events that occurred in all of history. Jesus lived 2,000 years ago during a tumultuous time. His life was one that we all remember and has inspired millions of people since he passed. His death is where something paranormal may have taken place though. Jesus died by crucifixion at the hands of the Romans. This was ordered by the governor Pilate, who felt the pressures from the Roman people and felt like he had to give in to them. The crucifixion process lasted for over 6 hours apparently, until Jesus finally gave his last breath. After he died, he was taken to his tomb, which was closed off and shut by a massive stone. This tomb was guarded by several officers for days, until on the 3rd day it said that the rock moved and Jesus ascended from that tomb to heaven. His body was no longer in the tomb on this day, and the belief that he went to heaven spread throughout the land. Now, a question a lot of people ask is, how do we know for sure that his body was gone and that tomb was actually empty? Now, we know that because after he was gone and his followers were claiming he was resurrected, then the best way for the Romans to stop that theory would have been to produce the body, which they were never capable of doing. So where did it go? Well, it's widely believed that Jesus ascended to heaven, that God acted and brought his son home to him. Maybe this event is less of a paranormal event and more of a miracle, but I still wanted to include it in this video. Number 1 on this list is the Dropa Stones. The legends of the Dropa Stones is a little bit up in the air, but if it is true, then there is certainly something paranormal afoot. The Dropa Stones are a collection of 716 circular discs that are said to be over 12,000 years old. They have very strange markings on them in a language that hardly anyone is familiar with. These stones were apparently discovered by Chupei Tay, a Chinese archaeologist in the 1930s who found them inside some abandoned caves. They made their way to a translator who was able to decipher some of the markings and learn that they were referring to humans and aliens. So the theory is that aliens were present 12,000 years ago and had some serious interactions with humans back then. Now, there are a few reasons why we can't take this as being full fact. 1, it's possible that the translator who was in charge of deciphering them is wrong. We can't say for sure that they're familiar with the intricacies of language 12,000 years ago. Number 2 is that today, nobody knows where these stones have gone. They aren't in a museum and their location is unknown. And this is really hard to believe considering there are 716 of them and they would have been one of the biggest archaeological finds in years. All of this being said though, if these stones are real and our translator was correct, then that is undeniable proof of an alien presence from 12,000 years ago, which is pretty cool to think about.
Kicking it off at number 5, we have the Kotaki Tunnel. Originally part of a railway built between 1927 and 1928, the tunnel reportedly spans 444 meters in length, which is the first bad omen. The number 4 is incredibly unlucky in Japanese culture and is often linked to ill omens, bad luck, and cautionary tales. During construction, there was a number of reported fatalities of the workers who built the tunnel. They succumbed to harsh working conditions, forced into back-breaking labor, and were even reportedly executed if they stepped out of line. This has led to some pretty strange sightings from the locals, with some even warning passers-by to avoid the tunnel entirely and find an alternative route. People have reported that the tunnel changes shape while driving through it. Sometimes it's incredibly straight, other times it's a winding passage of twist and turn. One ghost, a woman dressed all in white, rumored to be the bride of an executed worker, runs from the tunnel's entrance and jumps on the bonnets of cars waiting at the traffic signals. Locals have also reported ghosts standing at the edge of the tunnel, beckoning them to enter. No thanks. Up next at number 4, we have Akiku's haunted doll. In 1918, a young boy purchased a doll while on a trip to the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido. Knowing that she had a love for toys, the boy gave the doll to his little sister, Akiku, when he returned home from the trip. The pair were inseparable, and they went everywhere together. Later the next year, tragedy struck, and Akiku fell gravely ill. She had contracted a severe strain of influenza, and she tragically died shortly after. She was 5 years old. Her family were distraught, and to honor her memory, they placed her beloved doll beside the family altar. Here's where things get weird. A few days after they placed the doll in Akiku's memory, the family noticed that the doll's hair had mysteriously begun to grow. Originally, the doll's jet black hair had been cropped to shoulder length in the traditional Japanese style. But as the days went by, its hair began to grow longer and longer. By 1938, the family had moved from their home, but they felt compelled to keep the doll with them. You see, they were convinced that their daughter's spirit was trapped inside. To this day, the doll resides at Menenji Temple in Rito, Japan. You can actually go and see it for yourself. Even after all these years, the doll's hair continues to grow. Next up at number 3, Youa and Yemen. And of course, it can't be a list without ancient Japanese history unless there's a good old-fashioned ghost story involved. And this one is perhaps the most legendary of them all. A tale of betrayal, murder, and ghostly revenge, adapted over 30 times in Japanese history and cinema, and one of the underlying tales that forms the very unique aspect of Japanese horror to this day. Yotsuya Kaiden, but more specifically, the story of Youa and Tamiyan, Yemen. As the legend goes, Youa was a charming young woman who lived in a small town in Japan alongside her lover, Yemen, and although the pair were poor and had little money, they loved each other very much. Eventually they married, they had a child, and they were content in their standing in life. However, as time went on, the young Yemen became angry and depressed, surrounded by his reminder of his failures and his lack of prospects. Soon, he grew to hate Youa and instead began an affair with a rich young woman by the name of Yume. As time passed, at the prospect of marrying into Yume's family for the wealth and riches, Yemen plotted to secretly poison his own wife. One night over dinner, after he poisoned his wife's food, Youa pleaded with him to tell her what was wrong. The pair argued until late in the evening, and then, dejected and confused, Youa eventually consumed the poison, and Yemen watched as it slowly did its job. However, it didn't work as intended, and instead of killing her, it grossly disfigured Youa, contorting her into a shadow of her former self. Yemen was too much of a coward to finish the job, and Youa lived in pain and torment. And then, one evening, after taking his wife for a walk, he pushed her off a cliff when he realized that no one was around to notice. In public, he played the part of the victim, spending all of his money on a marital and pious funeral, knowing that his money troubles would soon be a thing of the past. Well, eventually on his wedding day to the wealthy Yume, when Yemen lifted the veil of his new bride, instead he saw his ex-wife's contorted and twisted face poisoned by his own hand. It screamed betrayal at him, and in a panic, Yemen drew his sword and swung at the ghostly apparition. And then a severed head collapsed and rolled across the floor of the wedding ceremony, but it wasn't his ghostly ex-wife's head, but instead the head of his new bride. Coming in at number 2, The Standing Death of Benkei. Which, come on, you know what I'm going to say, right? That's a pretty awesome title for a death metal album. Just saying, guys, another one to add to the pile. But really, the unbelievable tale of the standing death of Benkei is just as awesome as it sounds. Between 1180 and 1185, a series of bloodthirsty and complex battles were fought in Japan, a period of history known as the Genpei War. Now, during this time, many lives were lost, but a legendary hero of Japanese folklore emerged. Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the renowned warrior that defeated the Heike clans. But this story isn't so much concerned with Yoshitsune, but instead his most loyal of followers. Mushishibo Benkei, a man of mysterious birth who lived his life first as a monk, then a mountain hermit, and eventually the most badass warrior to have ever lived. He was one of the few men who would eventually earn the respect of Yoshitsune, and he did that by being an all-around unrelenting badass, really. But it's not exactly in his life where Benkei achieved immortality, but instead in his death. Eventually, after the Genpei War had been settled for many years, history of course decided to repeat itself, and the same echoes of betrayal stirred throughout the warring clans of Japan. After falling out of favour with his half-brother, Yoshitsune retreated and sought refuge with the powerful northern Fujiwara clan for several years. By 1187 though, the patron of the Fujiwara clan had passed away of old age, and Yoshitsune's half-brother forced the clan into succumbing to his will. Eventually his residents were surrounded by an impossibly large army, and yet one man stood in their way. Benkei, the final loyal warrior and follower of Yoshitsune, who guarded the one bridge that lay between his leader and the bloodthirsty army. It is said that during the battle, Benkei defeated more than 300 warriors single-handedly, allowing time for his leader to commit seppuku in his residence. Witnessing the unbridled bloodbath, the opposing force were terrified to approach, and instead began firing from a distance with a volley of arrows. One by one, arrow after arrow punctured Benkei, but still he didn't fall. As the legend goes, after the terrified army finally worked up the courage to come near him, they had found that Benkei had died from his many arrow wounds. Yet, he had died standing on his feet. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the 47 Ronin. And if you thought that the story of Benkei couldn't be topped, of course it can, because come on, this is Japan. Now, I don't say this lightly, but the legend of the 47 Ronin is perhaps one of the most important stories in Japanese culture, and certainly the most definitive of what it means to be a samurai. It exemplifies many traits that have been carved out of the thousands of years of Japanese history, and of course, as is the case with many important cultural tales, it has been adapted hundreds of times in both literature and cinema to varying degrees of success. And yes, I'm looking at you, Keanu Reeves. In the year 1701, the daimyo of the Eiko domain, which was a sort of warlord, was a warrior named Asano Naganori, a legendary samurai who inspired his host of loyal samurais for many years, leading a group of over 300 men, all of them formidable warriors in ancient Japan. Now, during one trip to Edo, which is now Tokyo, Asano butted heads with a particularly corrupt and generally unlikable protocol master, a man named Kira Yoshinaka, who was accustomed to making people bend over backwards for him, despite the cultural importance of hospitality in Japan. You see, this kind of stuff just didn't fly with Asano, and after putting up with insult after insult, he finally drew his sword on Kira, wounding him in the process. Of course, in the capital though, this was very much a crime, and one that was punishable by death. As a man of honor, Asano accepted his punishment and was ordered to commit seppuku as fit with his standing as a samurai. His clan of 300 men were disbanded, and Asano Naganori's estate was stripped of all holdings. But although the majority of his men would go off to wander the countryside masterless, a group of them couldn't accept this beseechment of honor. 47 of them, to be precise, the 47 Ronin, masterless samurai who would go on to plot their revenge for over 2 years, relentlessly training day after day, seeking only one thing: justice for their wronged master and the death of Kira Yoshinaka. Well, on the 14th of December 1702, that is exactly what happened, and the 47 Ronin marched into Edo to Yoshinaka's mansion, who had assembled the city guard to defend him. The 47 Ronin fought like warrior poets, defeating Kira's force in the name of their fallen master, sustaining just 2 injuries in the process. One of them was a sprained ankle. Eventually they found Kira, where they then cut off his head and carried it through the city of Edo to the grave of their master Asano Naganori. Here the 47 Ronin placed his head on Asano's grave, serving their final purpose, where they then turned themselves into the city. And then, moved by the impossible feat of loyalty displayed by the Ronin, the city allowed them to commit seppuku, restoring the honor of Asano Naganori and immortalizing themselves forever in the legend of the 47 Ronin.
Coming in at number 5, we've got an ancient Egyptian ghost story. Back in 1200 BC, somebody in ancient Egypt decided to put a ghostly story to paper, or pottery, I suppose. An Egyptologist named Gaston Maspero published this story found on 4 pieces of broken pottery, which tell the tale of a man who spent a night next to a tomb and was awakened by a ghost. This man then went to the high priest Kamsumheb and told him about the experience. From there, the high priest decided to summon the ghost and hear his story. When the specter arrives, he claims that he is Nabuzmek and that he's been disturbed in the afterlife by some sort of damage or trespass upon his tomb. It's not totally clear because more pottery pieces haven't been discovered yet. So the priest offers to rebuild a new tomb complete with a gilded coffin to make the spirit peaceful once again, but the ghost expresses some reluctance. He says that others have offered similar things but never followed through. So to prove his commitment to the cause, the priest then shares the ghost's fate for a little bit, living without food, water, air, or daylight. The text ends before the story concludes, but it seemed likely that the plan to pacify the phantom worked. Tales like this are relatively common in Egyptian lore, as they did believe in life after death. It's less creepy than a mummy rising from the tomb and killing people, but back then I feel like they didn't have all the modern, scary storytelling tools that we so enjoy today. Coming in at number 4, we've got a chained ghost in Athens. This one comes from a Roman senator known as Pliny the Younger. Even though the story was told before his death in 113 AD, it still survives. That's a long-lasting ghost story. According to this storyteller, there was a large and roomy house somewhere in Athens that should have been quite a popular location. Instead, it had a bad reputation and no one wanted to live in it. After the tale made its rounds, the philosopher Athenodorus went to see what could be done about the ghastly, noisy figure. He stayed in the house, and when the ghost finally appeared, he calmly approached it, marked the spot in which it materialized, and then ordered it dug up the next morning. Underneath, the skeleton of a man in chains was found, rotting away. Obviously, the man had endured a terrible fate and was tethered to this spot, lacking a proper burial. Once the proper funeral rites were complete, the ghost appeared no more and the house was no longer haunted. If only modern ghosts were this easygoing. I feel like anything that gets exorcised these days tries to kill and maim whoever was involved. Just chill, I'm trying to help you.
Next up at number 3, we have the bizarre story of the Round Schoolhouse. Rumoured to have been built in 1906 in the rural town of Bibay, this strange structure was given its nickname from locals due to its distinctive round shape. Between the 1940s and 70s, the building was used as an elementary school, but one day, mysteriously and abruptly, they closed their doors sometime in 1971. Here's the kicker. Not even the locals know why. It was left to fall into ruin, but rather creepily, tables and desks still remain there, gathering dust, perhaps waiting for students that will never come back. In fact, the Round Schoolhouse has been so forgotten that the only way to access the site is on foot through a nearby forest. Even the roads leading up to the school have disappeared into memory. Through the late 70s and 80s, the building was a hotbed for paranormal activity. By all accounts, it was infested by spirits. The location has become so infamous that brave Japanese YouTubers have tried to document the location. More sinister rumors have led to people completely disappearing, abandoned cars found in the nearby town, stories of friends that had gone missing after wanting to grab some footage from the Round Schoolhouse site. You've been warned. Stay far, far away. Bringing it in at number 2, we have the terrifying tale of Japanese ghost taxis. After the Great Eastern Earthquake that tragically hit Japan in 2011, a strange series of witness accounts began to crop up all over the island nation. In areas badly hit by the Delhi tsunami, stories of ghost taxis began to rapidly circulate. Many of these stories were even picked up by Western news outlets, perplexing people as to their origin. However, these stories are hardly new. The people of Tokyo have been warning travelers of spectral passengers since the days of the rickshaw. The most famous of these reports come from a taxi driver who was passing by a cemetery. There, he found a young woman dressed in all black, caught in the pouring rain. She flagged the driver down and in a sad voice asked the driver to take her to an address. When they arrived, she asked if they could just linger around for a few minutes. In the house beside them was the silhouette of a young man staring out of his window. And after 5 minutes of silence, the woman asked the driver just to take her home. When they arrived, the driver turned around to collect his fare, but the woman was just gone. Only a puddle of rainwater remained where she had been sitting. And finally, at our number 1 spot is Aikogawa Forest, also referred to as the Sea of Trees, or more recently, the Suicide Forest. This haunted location lies in the shadow of Mount Fuji. Such is the reputation of the forest that historically it is the most haunted location in the whole of Japan and has long been associated with the spirits of the dead. Reports include some pretty bizarre occurrences. A writer for the Japan Times told of an incident where he heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the forest. When he went to search for the noise, he came across the dead body of a man. It was later revealed that the corpse had been dead for some time, and it couldn't possibly be the source of the scream. Perhaps, thought the writer, it was his spirit. Other reports state strange dolls and icons nailed into the trees of the forest, with locals believing that they are curses left behind, binding the spirits to Aikogawa. It is also common for people entering the forest to string tape behind them so they can find their way back out. On one occasion, a woman claimed that her tape was deliberately cut, leaving her lost in the woods for days.
Coming in at number 5, we have the ghost of Anna Suret. Now, as we will go on to talk about later, John Wilkes Booth was the man responsible for assassinating Abraham Lincoln. However, his name wasn't the only one connected to the assassination. John Wilkes Booth had an entire gang. One of the sadder names connected to the assassination is that of Anna Suret. Anna is remembered chiefly for her heartbreaking and unsuccessful efforts to save her mother Mary from being hanged by the US government as a member of the John Wilkes Booth gang. Anna spent 24 hours trying to save her mother's life, visiting the White House twice in an effort to get President Johnson to halt the execution. Mary Suret was ultimately executed. However, history wasn't quite done with Anna yet. She reappeared in the public eye and even became an issue in the 1880 presidential election. By the time Anna died on October 24, 1904, public opinion largely regarded Mary Suret as the innocent victim of prosecutorial zeal, and Anna was remembered, in the words of the Baltimore American, for her utmost devotion and self-sacrifice in the closing hours of Mr. Suret's life. Now, many of the more recent residents of the White House have sworn the ghost of Anna Suret haunt the grounds, with many hearing knocks on the front doors pleading for the release of her mother, Mary Suret. Coming in at number 4, we have the ghost of David Burns. Jared Broach is the founder of the Nightly Spirits Company, which offers tours of haunted areas in several cities across the United States. However, when Broach started the tours back in 2012, he offered only one: the White House. I quote, "The White House has the best ghost stories, and I'd call them the most verified. Honestly, we could do a 10-hour tour if we really wanted to." Now, his favourite story is that of David Burns, who sold the land where the White House sits, and whose voice has been heard in the Oval Office countless times. David Burns was said to be an argumentative, controversial Scotsman, who despite his great wealth never got rid of his original home, which was a humble cottage overlooking Constitution Avenue. When David Burns died, he left his daughter his entire and very substantial estate, telling her from his deathbed, "Marcia, you've been a good daughter. You'll now be the richest girl in America." She was said to be the richest woman in America at the time. Now, like I said, since his death, Burns' ghost has been seen in the Oval Office, where a reporter told a security guard during the Truman administration that, while standing in the yellow Oval Room, he heard a whisper which said, "I'm Mr. Burns."
Coming in at number 3, we've got ROM Hall. This almost 400-year-old manor is full of ghost stories. It's huge and has a long haunted history. The spirit of Lady Dorothy Townshend, wife of the second Viscount of the estate, is said to roam the grounds. She died after contracting smallpox in 1726 and was known to have had an affair. Scandalous. For whatever reason, she wanders the manor dressed in brown, earning her the title the Lady in Brown. The spectre was first seen by Lucia C. Stone around the Christmas of 1835. Soon after, a Colonel Loftus also saw the ghost and claimed that she had empty eye sockets and a glowing face. These tales were passed around from person to person with little to no evidence until around 100 years later, when a photographer for Country Life magazine showed up to take some snapshots of the estate. They had set up their camera to capture some pictures of the stairwell when a hazy figure appeared. The picture was taken, and when developed, seems to show a translucent figure floating down the steps. It's quite the famous image and has attracted a fair deal of scrutiny. Maybe it's a double exposure, maybe it was doctored. However, no one's been able to prove either of these theories, but I suppose the same can be said about the ghost itself. Coming in at number 2, we've got Okigawa Woods. Also known as the Suicide Forest, this thick bit of flora sits at the foot of Mount Fuji in Japan. Plenty of disaffected people have come here to end their lives over the years. Nowadays, there are signs placed urging people to seek help, and volunteers often head in to try to talk people out of committing suicide. The forest is so thick and dense that folks need to bring colored tapes and ribbons to help them find their way back to the entrance. It doesn't help that most sound is muffled very effectively, making the whole area eerily quiet. On top of the dark denseness of it all, the soil's also rich with magnetic iron, which causes phones, GPSs, and even compasses to malfunction, leading people to become more hopelessly lost if they're not careful. Some say these technological issues are proof of demonic presence. As with anywhere where death is common, these woods have plenty of ghost stories associated with them. According to legend, people would bring family members here in times of famine and leave them to die. This was done to save food for others. Those left in the woods would slowly starve and become what are known as Youa, or souls filled with hatred, sadness, and a desire for revenge. Superstitious folks believe that these Youa would walk around screaming near their bodies, and often people tasked with removing their deceased from the woods would play rock, paper, scissors to figure out who had to do the scariest job. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Tower of London. This 900-year-old building is absolutely full to the brim with ghosts. There are enough stories to fill volumes of books. We can talk about the Queen's House, where Arabella Stuart roams. The first cousin of King James I married against the king's wishes and was sent to the tower as punishment. Her ghost floating around seems to tell us that she's still there serving time. If you were to visit the Martin Tower, you might run into a fuzzy grizzly ghost. Back in the day, all sorts of exotic animals were kept in here as an exotic zoo of sorts. Among these fascinating creatures was a bear, and this bear must have been treated very poorly because it stuck around for the afterlife to cause some mayhem. There's a story of the bear appearing before a guard and sending them into shock so bad that they died. I mean, I get it, it's a ghost bear. Fans of The Shining might find something familiar in the next tale, the tale of two ghostly twins. It's said that two young princes were murdered in 1483 and the culprit was never found. So now it's not uncommon to see two little boys holding hands, melting into walls and floating between rooms. Come play with us, Danny.
Coming in at number 5, we have The Woods. This video was taken by a man named Carlos from Barcelona in 2016, who would often film himself while on hikes in the forest at night. Since recording this video, Carlos has not gone on a nighttime hike since. So, let's proceed. The video begins with Carlos walking down a pitch black trail before hearing twigs breaking all around him. If that wasn't spooky enough, he begins to turn his camera from ahead of him to behind him, and once again ahead of him. However, when the camera faces front, we can see a figure in the darkness dressed in black with white hands and a white face. Carlos turns and begins to run, as you would. He makes it to a clearing before stopping and panning the camera down, where we can clearly see the figure, once again, this time standing next to 3 cement blocks and staring up at Carlos. Carlos moves once again and this time takes a seat. Not sure why, but once again the figure emerges from a clearing. Thankfully though, Carlos finds a hole in the side of a cliff that he crawls into. He waits before peeking out and seeing that the coast is clear. So he exits. However, when he turns around to face the hole he just crawled out of, the face of a woman can be seen. Carlos runs and he never looks back. Why would you ever go on a nighttime hike in the first place and record yourself? It is beyond me. What do you guys think though? Do you believe this video is real, or is Carlos fooling us all? Classic Carlos. Coming in at number 4, girls see ghost and run. Now this video begins with a mother filming her 2 daughters who are seemingly eating dinner at a small child-sized dinner table. It's quite adorable actually, but I digress, because suddenly the older daughter, who is facing the kitchen, which is pitch black, becomes very distressed, appearing to look off at something in the distance and crying. The other girl, who has her back facing the kitchen, turns around multiple times asking, "What? Seemingly seeing nothing from within the shadows. However, the older daughter is clearly distressed, looking back and forth between the kitchen and her mother, saying things like, "It scared me, I'm scared." The other sister attempts to reassure her, telling her everything's okay, but it doesn't seem to help. The mother keeps questioning her daughter as to why she is scared, but she doesn't give an answer. The young daughter, however, keeps looking back, sees nothing, and then begins to laugh like a crazy person, which is arguably one of the most terrifying parts of the entire video. Children laughing. Not for me. The mother asks once again, "What are you scared of?" with the daughter pointing to the shadows in the kitchen. However, it all becomes too much for the daughter, who breaks down in tears and leaves the table, heading over to her mother. The younger daughter once again turns around. This time though, she finally sees whatever it is her sister was so scared of, and screams a blood-curdling scream, shoving the table and running towards her mother. So what did the 2 girls see? We'll probably never know, and frankly, I don't think I ever want to know. Coming in at number 3, Jenna Bush Hagers' ghostly experience. Now, as it has become clear already, the White House has certainly seen its share of ghosts. However, Jenna Bush Hager has one of the more creepy stories to come from the presidential home. In a conversation with Hoda, Jenna recalled the time she and her twin sister Barbara Bush may have encountered the undead while living in the White House during their dad's time as president, aka George W. Bush, who was the 43rd president of the United States, who ran from 2001 to 2009. According to Jenna, the sisters were in their shared bedroom when Jenna's phone rang. I quote, "It woke us up in the middle of the night. We had a fireplace in our room, and all of a sudden we started hearing 1920s piano music as clear as day coming out of the fireplace." According to Jenna, it was incredibly spooky and she jumped in her sister's bed. To make things more terrifying, it wasn't a one-time thing. I quote, "The next week we had the same thing, but this time opera." She also recalled telling one of the White House staffers about her experience, who apparently promptly responded with, "Oh Jenna, you wouldn't believe what I've heard." Coming in at number 2, President Harry S. Truman's ghostly surprise. Harry S. Truman was the 33rd president of the United States, serving from 1945 to 1953, succeeding upon the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt after serving as vice president. During his term, he implemented the Marshall Plan to rebuild the economy of Western Europe and establish the Truman Doctrine and NATO. However, we're not talking about him as a president, we're discussing his ghostly encounter in the White House during his presidency. On one lonely night in 1946, it is said that President Harry S. Truman went to bed around 9 p.m. However, about 6 hours later, he heard something at his door. A knock, knock, knock. The banging awoke him. He wrote to his wife in a letter that is archived in the Presidential Library and Museum, I quote, "I jumped up and put on my bathrobe, opened the door and no one was there. Went out, looked up and down the hall, looked in your room and Margie's. Still no one. Went back to bed after locking the doors and there were footsteps in your room whose door I'd left open. Jumped and looked, and no one was there. The damn place is haunted, sure as shooting. The Secret Service said not even a watchman was up here at the hour. You and Margie had better come back and protect me before some of these ghosts carry me off." And finally, coming in at number 1, Abraham Lincoln. As most of you will know, or at least should know, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States from 1861 to 1865. He led the nation through its greatest moral, constitutional, and political crisis in the American Civil War, but more notably, he abolished slavery and modernized the US economy. However, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth while attending a play at Ford's Theatre with his wife. Booth entered the back of Lincoln's theatre box, crept up from behind, and fired at the back of Lincoln's head, mortally wounding him. After remaining in a coma for 8 hours, Lincoln passed away on April 15th. Now, as you might expect, there have been several stories about ghosts of former presidents haunting the White House, but perhaps the most common and popular is that of Lincoln. Lincoln's ghost, otherwise known as the White House ghost, is said to have haunted the White House since his death in 1865. Lincoln's ghost is also said to haunt many of his former residences in Springfield, Illinois, including his former law office. Theodore Roosevelt and Maureen Reagan and her husband have all claimed to have seen a spectral Lincoln in the White House, and on one occasion, Roosevelt's personal valet ran screaming from the White House claiming he had seen Lincoln's ghost. However, arguably the most famous incident was in 1942 when Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands allegedly heard footsteps outside the White House bedroom and answered a knock on the door, only to see Lincoln in a frock coat and a top hat standing in front of her. She promptly fainted. However, one of the more famous stories came from none other than British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. He loved to retire late, take a long hot bath while drinking a scotch and smoke a cigar and relax. However, on one occasion he climbed out of the bath and was startled to see Lincoln standing by the fireplace in his room, leaning on the mantel. Churchill promptly stated, "Good evening, Mr. President, you seem to have me at a disadvantage." According to the former Prime Minister, Lincoln smiled softly and then disappeared.
From a creepy cemetery with a paranormal visitor to a beautiful hotel brimming with ghosts, here are the top 5 haunted places in Colorado you should never visit. Number 5 on this list is the Molly Brown House. If you live in Denver, then there is no way that you aren't familiar with this haunted place. Thrillist says you've no doubt heard of the Molly Brown House and likely passed it on the street once or twice too. Molly Brown was a notable member of Denver's elite and perhaps known best for being a Titanic survivor, and despite allegedly living a relatively happy life, visitors to the museum and staff have reported quite a bit of strange happenings. Some have smelled what's believed to be husband J.J. Brown's pipe or have witnessed lights off and on the fritz, and staff have reported furniture being seemingly rearranged. Sometimes figures can even be seen roaming the house. A visit is worth it alone for the history, but the potential for getting a bit spooked or walking into a cold spot is definitely an added bonus. We once again have one of those locations where no one has any idea why it's haunted. It just is. Maybe it's the connection to the Titanic that has got this place acting funky. Obviously, that was a very unnatural occurrence and took the lives of tons of people in a very sad way. So I could believe that the Titanic and the survivor of the Titanic plays some role into why this place is haunted the way that it is. Good news is that this isn't the worst haunting that you can run into. Like, yes, you will get a little scared for sure. You might smell something funny or have a ghost pull something on you or even maybe have small valuables go missing. But ultimately, you probably shouldn't be dragged to the underworld here by some shadow demon or
or anything like that. So I guess if you were to visit any place on this list, then this one wouldn't be the worst. Just be prepared for what's coming, because if you aren't, then it could leave you with some serious mental trauma. Number 4 on this list is Phantom Canyon Road. You need to be very careful on this road because there is a good chance you could suffer a serious crash if you aren't. Thrillist says a haunted road is one thing, but a haunted road in Colorado means you're likely on the edge of a mountain and at some serious elevation. Phantom Canyon Road is a detour off the Gold Belt Tour byway connecting Cripple Creek and Florence, and was originally the railroad for that route. As you drive along, you can clearly see the ghost towns of Wilbur, Adelaide, and Glenbrook, and legend has it that the reason for Phantom Canyon's name is credited to sightings of a man wearing a prison uniform walking along the tracks in the 1890s. The man supposedly had been executed at the Colorado State Penitentiary a few days earlier. So yeah guys, you better have your wits about you, because if you don't, this ghost might come out and startle the crap out of you, and then the next thing you know, you're gonna be face deep into a tree somewhere. It also just adds to the horror ambiance that you're driving past several ghost towns along the way. Like, of course, they just had to be on the side of the road as you're also getting stalked by this ghost prisoner. No one really knows what this prisoner wants with you, but let's face it, I can't imagine it's good. My dude was executed back in the day, so for one, what he did was probably pretty bad to warrant a punishment like that, and then secondly, he literally got executed, and I can only guess that his ghost probably isn't too pleased about that. Y'all need to be especially careful if you're driving down this road, because at any point, this guy could pop out.
Coming in at number 3, we have The Abandoned House. A ghost hunter named Adventure Allah in Saudi Arabia filmed himself exploring a supposedly haunted house that is now completely abandoned. Now, I should preface this point by saying that viewers of this video have been quick to point out ghosts, jinns, demons, and even strange creatures lurking within the video. But the question is, can you spot them? Well, let's proceed. The video consists of the man exploring the abandoned home. However, throughout the video you can hear loud banging coming from different locations within the house. He roams around opening doors but seemingly finding no one. However, the banging continues. He follows the sounds, but they continue to avoid him, with the noises appearing in the previous location he was in. When he investigates, it disappears. However, arguably one of the scariest parts of the video comes when he hears a noise coming from inside a room, leading to a wardrobe. He attempts to open it, but to no avail. However, the doors then open and then seemingly close on their own. This continues for the duration of the video, with him catching seemingly stable and heavy objects moving around on their own, with loud banging coming from various parts of the house. What do you guys think though? Real or fake? Coming in at number 2, we have the Sally House. Now, this one comes to us from BuzzFeed Unsolved. For those who don't know, BuzzFeed Unsolved is a documentary web series that first aired on YouTube back in 2016 and has subsequently run for 11 seasons. The show follows Ryan Bergara and co-host Shane Madej, who discuss unsolved crimes, haunted places, alleged demonic possessions, and historical occurrences. Now, in the specific episode, they investigate the Sally House in Atchison, Kansas. Now, a quick backstory of the property. The Sally House was built in the mid-1800s and is believed to be haunted by a little girl named Sally, who died in the house during an appendicitis surgery. However, it is now believed that the house is haunted by multiple spirits and evil entities. The house is said to be the most haunted house in all of Kansas. As of today, it's standing vacant because nobody wants to live there. So, of course, this is the perfect location for Brian and Shane to visit. The pair head into the kitchen with a flashlight sitting on the kitchen counter. Shane continuously begs for any of the ghostly entities to turn on the light, while Ryan begs that they don't. Shane then says to the spirits, "If you don't like us, turn the lights on." The light then turns on out of nowhere. To make matters worse, they both approach the flashlight once again, stating, "Please turn the lights off, spirits." And what happens? The light goes off. Very creepy indeed. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Dalhouses Castle. Helen Parker is an Australian news reporter reporting from the Dalhouses Castle in Scotland, a castle which is notorious for being haunted. However, Helen, a skeptic, decides to explore the location alone to prove everybody wrong. When you think of an 800-year-old castle, you think ghosts, spirits lurking in the stone halls, distressed spirits haunting the tunnels. However, for Helen, she has never believed in ghosts or spirits. So, at 2 AM, she decides to go to the dungeons alone, just her and her camera. Brilliant idea, Helen. Perfect. She sets up the camera facing a handful of tables, herself, and creepy looking armor. Helen herself is facing the only door in the room. She starts off by saying that there have been no signs of any ghostly entities in the dungeons, just as she predicted. However, Helen makes a terrible mistake by beginning to taunt the supposedly ghostly residents. She refers to the castle as hocus pocus before saying maybe there is no such thing as ghosts whatsoever. However, just moments later, Helen leans back in her chair, examines the room, before a handful of bangs can be heard from behind her. Helen then screams and runs from her chair. She then grabs her camera and leaves, telling the ghost, I'm going. So what exactly happened? According to Helen, during the experience, she felt, I quote, an intense electrical feeling down the right side of my face and head.
Coming in at number 5, Lycurgus of Thrace. Lycurgus was the valiant king of the Adoni in Thrace, and his story is a gruesome one. Lycurgus was heavily against the cult led by Dionysus, the god of wine, and a famous partier within Greek mythology, sharing his wine with mortals and his many concubines of both sexes. He also was a heavy drinker of beer, Lycurgus that is, the natural enemy to any wine-loving god. However, the cult formed around his party habits became quite dangerous, having lavish gatherings that would disrupt the peace of the many cities they passed through. In response, Lycurgus banished the cult from Thrace in hopes of stopping them from messing up his land. Of course, Dionysus, being a god and all, would still visit Lycurgus's kingdom, and when he did, Lycurgus responded by imprisoning all of his followers, treating them roughly and poorly, especially Dionysus' nursemaid Ambrosia. This royally angered the god of wine, and so he punished the king of Thrace by making him go absolutely bonkers crazy insane. Consumed by madness, Lycurgus would go on a tirade, killing many of his own people without even realizing they were people. But the horror reached its apex when Lycurgus mistook his son for a trunk of ivy, something that is considered holy to Dionysus. So he killed him, cutting off his fingers, toes, nose, and ears. And of course it didn't end there. He actually proceeded to kill his whole family, mistaking them for the things that Dionysus holds dear. As a consequence of his insanity, the land of Thrace fell into a famine, and Dionysus decreed that the land would remain completely barren until he felt that Lycurgus had truly paid for the imprisonment of Dionysus' cult. The response of his people? To tie him up and literally fling him into a herd of man-eating horses. The terrifying punishment given to Lycurgus serves as a stark reminder of the merciless nature of the gods, and the cruel responses they have to anyone or anything that does them wrong. The myth highlights the tremendous power the Greek gods hold, and the chilling effects they have when used for their own malevolent reason. Sorry to all my beer drinkers watching this video, you guys would not get it easy in ancient Greece. Next up at number 4, Cronis. Cronis is probably the most famous of the Greek titans, the deities that created the many gods of Greek mythology and are the offspring of the primordial gods that created the universe. Cronis gets his fame because he was the only titan with the gall to attack his own father, Uranus, the ruler of the universe. With nothing but a giant stone sickle, Cronis cut off the cojones of Uranus, and from their mutilation spawned giants and the goddess Aphrodite. From that point on, Uranus threatened vengeance against all his sons and called them titans, because they overstepped their boundaries for committing such an act. But it was not this act that is haunting, but instead the atrocities Cronis committed after learning that he was destined to be defeated by his own spawn, much like he did his own father. When he heard this destiny, Cronis quickly went mad with fear, as he was soon to have many offspring of his own, such as the gods Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, and Hades, with the mother goddess Rhea. Upon their birth, he devoured them all, in order to prevent the prophecy from coming to fruition. When his 6th and final youngster was born, Zeus, Rhea hid him in Crete, and instead gave Cronis a rock wrapped in baby's clothes for him to devour instead. How he was unable to tell that it wasn't a living, breathing being, I don't know, but I digress. I mean, I've heard of eating your problems away, but Cronis definitely took it too far. Many artworks exist of Cronis devouring his offspring, with the most famous being Saturn devouring his son by Francisco Goya. Saturn was another name for Cronis, and the art on its own is quite terrifying, depicting Cronis' desperate and mad nature as he gnaws away at his own family. But the story doesn't end there. Zeus was secretly raised in a cave, masked by the noises of armored male dancers to hide the sounds of the youngster's cries. When the time came for Zeus to confront his father, his grandmother Gaia gave Zeus a special concoction that would make Cronis puke out all of Zeus's siblings, plus that rock that Rhea gave him. After freeing his now fully grown siblings, Zeus and the other gods waged war against all the titans in an event known as the Titanomachy. And just as the prophecy foretold, Zeus eventually slayed his father Cronis and led the gods to victory, ushering in a new era of power within the world of Greek mythology.
Number Number 3 on this list is Central City Masonic Cemetery. Of course we had to have a cemetery on this list. No haunted place list would be complete without at least one of them. Thrillist says, founded as a mining town in the late 1800s, Central City is now known as a destination for those looking to head to the hills for a gambling fix in the casinos that now dot the area. But one thing hasn't changed. The woman in black who twice a year appears in this hilltop cemetery above the town. Known as the Columbine Lady, she comes to visit the grave of John Cameron, a prominent former resident of Central City who died in 1884. Some believe she is his fiancée, appearing to leave flowers for her lost love on November 1st, the anniversary of Cameron's death, and April 5th, a date for which the significance remains a mystery, much like the woman herself. This place is safe to go to if, of course, you do not go during these times. She's been coming for a long time, and anyone who tried to interfere with her has had to pay the price. Now, people kind of suspect that she was in a relationship with John Cameron, but there's also another theory. Many people think that John actually wronged her in his life, and that this woman in black comes twice a year to double check that John is still dead and hasn't come back to life by some means. Pretty scary tale for sure, one that you probably don't want to get involved with. Number 2 on this list is the Broadmoor. Located in Colorado Springs, this hotel would be freaking awesome if it wasn't so haunted. Thrillist says this sprawling 5-star hotel has a lot to offer for anyone seeking a relaxing and indulgent getaway. But along with the golf course, spa, and nearby zoo, there's one feature you won't find in any brochure. Staff and guests alike have reported the presence of a woman, often in the penthouse where Julia Penrose, co-founder of the property, once lived. While not confirmed, Penrose's death is said to have been surrounded by a strange occurrence in which she went missing and was later found, confused and shaking in the woods nearby with no memory of how she got there. She passed away a week later, and perhaps her spirit remains, watching over the property and seeking answers about her own mysterious death. Now I am wondering, man, how did Penrose die? Like, this whole story feels like a movie or something like that. I truly think somebody needs to get in here and investigate what the heck happened here. Because, like, should we be scared of the region because this is gonna happen again? Was Julia doing something specific before she disappeared, and should we avoid doing that thing? There are just so many questions that need to be answered here, and sadly I can't do it from the comfort of Toronto. That being said, I'm also not trying to end up like Julia, and therefore will be leaving this job to somebody far more qualified. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Highlands Ranch Mansion. A truly picturesque mansion, one that's been standing for over 100 years and one that's home to a ghostly spirit. Thrillist says this sprawling stone mansion, built in 1891, is often rented for weddings and events due to its impressive structural beauty and picturesque prairie views. But it's also a historic property and somewhat of a museum of the times, with a bit of paranormal activity sprinkled in. The ghost of Julia Kistler, daughter of F. Kistler, who bought the property in 1926, is said to haunt the home, with visitors and staff alike reporting hearing a woman's sobs, seeing a silhouette figure moving about when the mansion was otherwise vacant, and lights sporadically turning on and off. I don't know about you guys, but during my wedding ceremony, I want to hear beautiful sounding music, not the sobs of some ghost woman thing. Apparently she's crying all the time, and this woman's emotions are not something to play with. There's a story where once several children were playing around here. There was a wedding ceremony scheduled here for later that day, and the children were off doing what kids do before the proceedings got underway. They ran into this ghost crying, and then they started to make fun of her. They were rude and definitely unkind, but they also didn't deserve what she did next. It's said that in a fit of rage, she flew inside their bodies and possessed each and every one of them for a short time, showing them things that were truly terrifying. Things that have ultimately changed those boys' lives and altered their mentality forever. Any ghost that's capable of doing something like that, that's one that I don't want to be around.
Number 5, The Exorcist. Technically, I'm not about to start talking about the set of the classic 1973 horror film directed by William Friedkin that launched Linda Blair into stardom. You know, the film that tells the story of a young girl who was possessed by a demonic force. One of the highest grossing horror films of all time. Critics have rightfully praised it as a truly terrifying film experience. But instead, how about we talk about the crazy true story behind the film? So back in the late 1940s, a boy known by the alias Roland Doe was mourning the death of his aunt, who had taught him about spiritualism and how to use a Ouija board. I can already see the danger in this situation, and that's without using movie context clues. Specifically, in January of 1949, the family reported hearing strange dripping noises and scratching sounds in the house. So at first, Roland's mother believed the noises were connected to the dead aunt, and the family started trying to reach out to the spirits they believed to be in the house, hoping they could reason with them, and asked to be left alone. To the shock and surprise of nobody, this only made things worse. Roland claimed he could hear someone walking in his room at night when he was trying to sleep, and there were scratch marks found on his mattress in the morning, and eventually, scratch marks began appearing on his body. The family converted to Catholicism and tried to have Roland baptized, but the boy responded to their baptism attempts with unbridled rage. At one point, Roland was admitted to a hospital where a psychiatrist attempted to treat him but was ultimately unsuccessful. The family was out of options, so they called upon priests to perform an exorcism, one of which was Father William S. Bodern. At one point, he attempted to protect Roland through blessings and by putting a crucifix under his pillow. After leaving Roland to rest, the family returned to find furniture flipped over and the crucifix moved to the edge of the bed, and Roland's mattress was shaking uncontrollably. While the exorcisms were performed, young Roland vomited, urinated, spit, and spoke in Latin in a deep, adult-sounding voice that was unfamiliar. Honestly, this sounds like a case that would have been right in the Warrens' niche, so it's wild knowing that they didn't investigate it. Number 4. The Bell Witch in Tennessee. One day in 1817, John Bell was inspecting his cornfield in Robertson County when he encountered a strange-looking animal sitting in the middle of a corn row. Describing it as having the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit, John fired several times at the being in shock when the animal simply vanished. He thought nothing more of the incident until later that night when the family began hearing thumping sounds on the outside walls of their log home. So the mysterious sounds continued each night, always growing louder and more forceful. In the weeks that followed, the Bell descendants began waking up frightened, complaining that rats were gnawing at their bedposts, their bed covers were being pulled from them, and their pillows were tossed onto the floor by some invisible entity. As time went on, the Bells began hearing faint whispering voices, which were too weak to completely understand but sounded like a feeble old woman singing hymns. The encounters escalated, and the Bells' youngest daughter, Betsy, began experiencing brutal encounters with the invisible being. It would pull her hair and slap her relentlessly, often leaving welts and handprints on her face and body. Now, the family had kept the disturbances a secret until that point in time, but this led them to, share their story with their neighbor, James Johnston. Hey, he was skeptical at first, and I can't say I blame him, but he and his wife spent the night at the Bell home to see if they could figure it out. Things began peacefully, but once they retired for the evening, they were subjected to these same terrifying disturbances that the Bell family had been experiencing. After their bed covers were yanked off and James was slapped, he sprang out of bed exclaiming, in the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want? The entity didn't respond and the rest of the night was peaceful. So the next morning he explained to the Bells that the culprit was likely an evil spirit, the kind that the Bible talks about. The entity's voice had strengthened over time and became loud and unmistakable. So now it was singing very loud hymns, it was quoting scripture, carrying on intelligent conversation, and once even quoted, word for word, 2 sermons that were preached at the same time on the same day, but 13 miles apart. Word of these supernatural phenomena soon spread outside of the settlement, even to Nashville, where then Major General Andrew Jackson became interested in the so-called Bell Witch in 1819 and decided to visit the home to investigate. As Andrew's entourage, made up of several men, well-groomed horses, and a large wagon, approached the Bell property, the wagon jolted to a sudden stop. It became stuck in a muddy creek bed and the horses were unable to pull it. Well, at least that's what the men thought. After several minutes of cursing and trying to coax the horse into pulling the wagon, Jackson proclaimed, "By the eternal boys, that must be the Bell Witch." And what do you know? A disembodied woman's voice told them that they could proceed, and she would see them again later that evening. They were then able to proceed across the property, up the lane, and to the Bell home. That night, one of the men claimed to be a witch tamer, saying his silver, tiny, little things would end any spirit they came into contact with, and the entity would fear him. Now, as your friendly narrator, I can see where this is going, can you? Yeah, immediately after that stupid comment, the man screamed and began jerking his body in different directions, complaining that he was being stuck with pins and hurt severely. A strong, swift kick to the man's lower area from an invisible foot sent him out the front door. To the shock and surprise of absolutely nobody, the entity was angry and announced that there was another fraud in the group, but she'd wait until the next night to identify him. Now terrified, Andrew's men begged to leave the farm, but he insisted on staying. He wanted to know who the other fraud was. What happened after all of that isn't super duper clear, but Andrew and his entourage were spotted in nearby Springfield early the next morning, going back to to Nashville. He later proclaimed that he would rather fight the British than fight the Bell Witch. The entity continued to express disdain for John Bell, relentlessly vowing to end him. John had been experiencing episodes of twitching in his face and difficulty swallowing for almost a year, and it was only growing worse with time. By the fall of 1820, his declining health had confined him to the house, where the malicious entity continuously removed his shoes when he tried to walk and slapped his face when he recovered from his numerous seizures. Her shrill voice was heard all over the farm, cursing and chastising old Jack Bell, which was the nickname she had given him. Now, John Bell breathed his last breath on the morning of December 20th, 1820, after slipping into a coma a day earlier. Immediately after his death, his family found a vial of strange black liquid in the cupboard. John Jr. stupidly sprinkled 2 drops on the cat's tongue. The cat jumped up into the air, rolled over in midair, and had passed before it hit the floor. The entity then exclaimed, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night," which fixed him. John Jr. tossed the mysterious vial into the fireplace, where it burst into a bright blue flame and went up the chimney. Over time, Betsy Bell became interested in Joshua Gardner, a young man who lived nearby, and with the blessings of their parents, they decided to marry, and everybody was happy about the engagement. Almost everybody. The evil, mysterious entity became furious and repeatedly ordered Betsy not to marry Joshua. The young couple couldn't frequent the river, the fields, or the cave to play without the entity, bothering them, and the constant pressure was more than Betsy could handle. And on Easter Monday of 1821, she met Joshua at the river and broke off the engagement. Shortly after that, the entity visited her mom, Lucy, and told her that it was leaving, but would come back in 7 years. And it did. In 1828, as promised. Most of the 3-week return visit centered on John Bell Jr., making predictions of the future. Now, this entity that tormented the Bell family and the Red River settlement almost 200 years ago is often blamed for unexplainable manifestations that occur near the old Bell farm today. The faint sounds of people talking and young folks playing can sometimes be heard in the area, and it's not uncommon to see candlelights dance through the dark fields late at night. Photography is especially difficult. Some pictures taken in the area show mist, orbs of light, and other phenomena, including human-like figures who were not present when the pictures were taken. The cause of the Bell family's torment over 200 years ago, along with today's continued, chaos in the area, remains a mystery. Numerous theories have been put forth, but all have been debunked. However, most researchers agree that something had to have caused the incidents at Red River in the early 1800s that gave rise to the Bell Witch legend as we know it today. Weird that Ed and Lorraine didn't visit there.
And at number 3, Prometheus. The terrifying tale of Prometheus is a story that is deeply embedded in Greek mythology, a narrative of rebellion, punishment, and humanity's ceaseless pursuit of knowledge. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, was one of the Titans, the powerful race of beings that predated the Greek gods of Olympus. Prometheus's tale begins with the audacious act of defying Zeus, the king of the gods, which honestly could be anything. Zeus got angry pretty easily. According to one version of the myth, Prometheus stole fire from the heavens and gifted it to humankind. Fire, a symbol of knowledge and enlightenment, allowed humanity to advance in countless ways, from cooking food to forging tools. However, Zeus had forbidden the Titans from sharing the divine fire with mortals, fearing that it would elevate humans to dangerous heights. Plus, the gods were already on bad terms with the Titans after the Titanomachy. Zeus's wrath was swift and brutal. He devised a gruesome punishment for Prometheus. The Titan was bound to a rock on Mount Caucasus, where an eagle, a symbol of Zeus, would visit him daily to tear at his liver. Prometheus was immortal, so his liver would regenerate each night, ensuring that his torment would continue indefinitely. This horrific cycle represented not only physical agony, but also the enduring suffering of the human condition. Prometheus's defiance did not stop at the gift of fire, though. He also possessed knowledge of a secret that could change the fate of the gods. He foresaw a time when a mortal woman named Thetis would bear a son greater than his father Zeus. To prevent this prophecy from coming true, Zeus married Thetis off to a mortal man, Peleus, thus averting the potential threat to his rule. Prometheus's actions, ultimately motivated by a desire to aid humanity and challenge the divine order, reflected the enduring human spirit of curiosity and defiance against authority. His suffering served as a chilling reminder of the consequences of challenging the gods, even with the noblest of intentions. Prometheus's tale also underscores the complex relationship between the gods and mortals in Greek mythology. While the gods were powerful and revered, they were not infallible, and they often displayed human-like qualities such as jealousy, anger, and vengeance. Prometheus's rebellion and subsequent torment serve as a stark warning of the consequences of crossing the divine, while also highlighting the importance of knowledge, innovation, and the enduring quest for human progress. Number 2. Orpheus. The horrifying story of Orpheus is one that explores the depths of love, loss, and the unrelenting pursuit of the impossible. Orpheus was a legendary musician and poet in Greek mythology, known for his enchanting music that could move the hearts of gods and mortals alike. Orpheus's tale centers around his passionate love for his wife Eurydice. Their love was deep and true, but it was tragically cut short when Eurydice was bitten by a venomous snake and died. Orpheus, consumed by grief and despair, could not bear the loss of his beloved and decided to embark on a harrowing journey to the underworld underworld to retrieve her. Armed only with his lyre and his extraordinary musical talents, Orpheus descended into the dark realm of Hades, where he used his haunting melodies to charm even the fearsome ferryman Charon, who carried souls across the river Styx. His music moved the stone-hearted judges of the dead, and eventually he stood before Hades and Persephone, the rulers of the underworld. Orpheus made a plea for the release of Eurydice, and his music once again worked its magic. Hades and Persephone, moved by his music and his love for Eurydice, agreed to grant his request, but with one condition. He must lead Eurydice back to the world of the living without looking back at her until they reached the surface. It was a test of his unwavering faith and trust. As Orpheus ascended from the depths of the underworld, his heart pounded with hope. Yet, just before they reached the surface, doubt and fear overcame him. Unable to resist the urge, he turned to look at Eurydice, hoping to catch a glimpse at her. In that moment, she was whisked back into the shadows of the underworld, lost to him forever. The horrifying twist in Orpheus' story lies in his heartbreaking failure. His love was pure, his music bewitching, and his journey into the underworld was nothing short of heroic. But his inability to restrain his curiosity and doubt cost him the ultimate price. Orpheus was left to wander the world in inconsolable grief, forever haunted by the memory of Eurydice and the sound of her footsteps fading away. And at number 1, a personal favorite of mine, Sisyphus. The chilling tale of Sisyphus encapsulates the profound concept of existential despair and the futility of life's repetitive struggles. Sisyphus, a cunning and deceitful mortal, became infamous for this audacious defiance of the gods, particularly, and if you've been paying attention to this video, you know what god I'm about to name, Zeus. Sisyphus' first transgression was divulging the secrets of the gods, violating the divine code of silence. This act of betrayal shook the foundations of divine authority and disturbed the balance of power. His second act of defiance was even more audacious. Sisyphus managed to capture Thanatos, the personification of death, and imprison him. By doing so, he disrupted the natural order of life and death, granting a brief respite to mortals who were meant to succumb to the inexorable cycle. Zeus, the ruler of the gods, could not let Sisyphus' insolence go unpunished. In retribution, Sisyphus was condemned to an eternal torment within the depths of the underworld. His punishment was both symbolic and profoundly chilling. He was tasked with rolling a colossal boulder up a steep hill. However, just as he neared the summit, the boulder's weight would defy him, rolling back to the base of the hill, forcing Sisyphus to recommence his labor in an endless cycle. The terrifying nature of Sisyphus' punishment lies in its utter hopelessness. He was compelled to engage in an eternal, futile task that mocked his determination and willpower. The Sisyphean ordeal symbolizes the essence of the human condition, our ceaseless struggle against seemingly insurmountable challenges, and our unyielding quest for meaning in the face of inevitable adversity. Albert Camus, the renowned French philosopher, delves into the philosophy of Sisyphus in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus asserted that despite the apparent absurdity of Sisyphus' predicament, he found meaning in the act of pushing the boulder. Sisyphus, in embracing the absurdity of his punishment, defied the gods by finding purpose and contentment in the very act of pushing the boulder, spawning the famous quote, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." This defiance, according to Camus, constituted a form of revolt against the absurdity of existence. So just remember guys, life is truly just pushing a boulder up a hill. And even though sometimes you'll get all the way back to the top, you might drop it and go back to the start again. And while it may seem hopeless, it's important to keep pushing on, because simply the act of trying to reach that summit is worth more in life than just sitting at the bottom in stagnation.
Number 5 on this list is the dancing plague of 1518. That's right guys, you heard that right. A plague about dancing. Honestly, I'd never heard of this before, and in my whole time working on this channel, this is actually the coolest and strangest thing that I've ever come across. So in Strasbourg, Alsace, which is now modern day France, in the year 1518, from July all the way to September, people just started dancing. For months, hundreds of people were dancing in the streets of France, and they couldn't stop. It's said that one woman started dancing in the streets one day, and then some more came, and they just kept going for months with absolutely no reason at all. People started thinking that this was the cause of a demonic possession or some ghost that was making people lose their minds, but in actuality, nobody had any idea why these people were doing this. This wasn't a casual waltz either. These people were going hard. These people went so hard that they literally danced themselves to death. I can't possibly imagine going so hard at the club that I died, but that's basically what happened here with these people. There are actual claims that at one point in the heat of all this dancing, up to 15 people were dying per day just from dancing. This death kept happening, and these people would continue dancing around all of these bodies. This plague went on until September, when it just suddenly subsided, and that was that. No explanation, no reasoning behind it. They just went hard for several months and then stopped. That's why everyone thinks that something demonic has to be the cause of all this. Some people have speculated that food poisoning may have played some role, but that just doesn't make any sense to me because it went on for months. Seriously folks, please comment down below what you think about this or some theories about why this happened, because it has me pretty baffled. Number 4 on this list is the lost city of Atlantis. Atlantis is a city that is considered to be a utopian society in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was first documented by Plato in 2 of his works, Timaeus and Critias. Now even though Atlantis is often referred to as a city these days, back then Plato described it as an island. This island was located in the Atlantic and was said to be pretty massive, bigger than Asia Minor and Libya combined. This island, or city, was extremely wealthy and had a surplus of resources. This is what led them to being considered a utopia and a highly advanced group. Now Plato describes a great battle between these Atlanteans and the Athenians and says that after lots of hard fighting, the Athenians eventually prevailed in the war. Then several massive earthquakes caused the earth to shift and the entire island of Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea and now rests at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. Many people have speculated on how accurate these tales from Plato are, with experts believing that this could just all be a myth. However, the legend of Atlantis started to circulate around Europe many years later and people began searching for this lost city. Nobody has found it to this day, but that doesn't mean that it never existed. Maybe we're just thinking about it the wrong way. Some people have thought that this entire city of Atlantis could have been aliens coming down to Earth and that potentially this island was never really an island to begin with. Plato does describe the society as being a utopia, and an explanation for that would be aliens that have far better technology than we do. Maybe when this island apparently disappeared, these aliens just left. Now that does beg the question, if they're so advanced, how on earth could the ancient Athenians beat them in a battle? Which I do think is a very fair point. I do believe that Plato and the people after him have exaggerated this story, and the full truth has probably been lost in history. But I also believe that this tale didn't just come out of nowhere, and something potentially paranormal could be at hand.
Number 3, the Vampire of Highgate Cemetery. In 1967, 2 girls walking home along the nearby Swains Lane claimed to have witnessed the dead rising from their graves by the cemetery's north gate. Another teenager had been awoken one night with something cold and clinging on her hand, which left prominent marks next morning, while reports circulated of a tall man in a hat walking in the area, before melting through the cemetery's walls. On Halloween night of 1968, a group of teenagers interested in the occult visited Tottenham Park Cemetery, at a time when it was being regularly vandalized by intruders. According to a report in the London Evening News on November 2nd, the young folks arranged flowers taken from graves in a circular pattern, with arrows of blooms pointing to a new grave, which was uncovered. Now a coffin was opened and the body inside was disturbed, but their most macabre act was driving an iron stake in the form of a cross through the lid and into the chest of the corpse. In a letter to the Hampstead and Highgate Express on February 6th of 1970, David Farrant wrote that when passing Highgate Cemetery on Christmas Eve of 1969, he had glimpsed a grey figure, which he considered to be supernatural, and asked if others had seen anything similar. Sean Manchester claimed David's grey figure was a vampire, and the media quickly latched on, embellishing the tale with stories of the vampire being a king of the vampires or of practicing black magic. Now, a rivalry grew between the two guys, with each claiming that he could, expel or destroy the specter. Sean declared he would hold an exorcism on Friday the 13th, which, we love that, and a lot of TV outlets conducted interviews with both men, and, others who would claim to have seen supernatural figures in the cemetery, which were transmitted early on the evening of March 13th, and within 2 hours, a mob of hunters from all over London and beyond swarmed over gates and walls into the locked cemetery, despite police efforts to, control them. Some months later, on August 1st, the charred and headless remains of a woman's body were found not far from the catacomb, believed to have been used in a black magic ritual. Now, David was found by police in the churchyard beside the cemetery one night in August, carrying a crucifix and a wooden stake. He was arrested, but when the case came to court, it was dismissed. There was more publicity about David and Sean when rumors spread that they would meet in a magician's duel on Parliament Hill on Friday the 13th of April in 1973, which never occurred. But once again, Ed and Lorraine never ever looked into this case at all. Mind-boggling. Number 2, devil worshipping. Technically, I'm cheating a little on this case, and sadly it was after the passing of Ed Warren, but Lorraine chose not to consult on it, making it perfect for our list. So Danielle Harkins, who was a 35-year-old school teacher near St. Petersburg, Florida, started acting strangely in June of 2012, developing an interest in demonic rituals, and soon after was arrested for the harm of 7 of her former students. She had told them they needed to rid their bodies of demons as the group gathered before dusk around a small fire near the St. Petersburg Pier. They should cut their skin to let evil spirits out, and then burn the wounds to ensure that those spirits would not return, which Ow! When Harkins held a lighter to one person's hand, wind blew the flame out, which prompted her to douse his hand in perfume before setting it on fire. Obviously, he suffered second-degree burns. Another person was cut on the neck with a broken bottle, and Harkins used a flame to heat a small key, which he then used to, cauterize the wound. The police were notified because a friend of one of the students who participated in the ritual raised alarms. However, none of the students themselves told their parents about the event or would comment following the arrest of Harkins for aggravated battery and harm. Honestly, I wish Lorraine would have helped with this case to provide answers for everybody. Number 1. The Winchester Mystery House. In 1886, an eccentric widow left her home in Connecticut for California's rural Santa Clara Valley to start a new life after the tragic loss of several family members. If you're unaware of the story, this was the tale of Sarah Winchester, a millionaire heiress who managed her own finances and acted on a passion for architecture and design by overseeing the never-ending construction project of a rambling mansion in San Jose. Her reclusive lifestyle, along with the restrictive gender norms of the era and the cursed money she was associated with, caused neighbors and local press to speculate, and legends quickly began to swirl about the mysterious woman and her bewildering house. Even though, it was like a modern marvel at the time with indoor plumbing, multiple elevators, a hot shower, and central heating, the mansion was appraised as having no value because, it had doors that opened to nothing but thin air, staircases that led straight into the ceiling, and a maze of labyrinth-like hallways. So naturally, legends began swirling, speculating that the bizarre architectural choices were an attempt to rid the home of unwelcome spirits of the dead killed by the Winchester rifle. And here's the reason I've mentioned it today. Even though I felt like this would have been a must-visit during Ed and Lorraine's travels, I couldn't find any record of them having anything to do with this residence. A cursed home constantly being added on to cater to the spirits and zilch? Obviously, they must have known something we don't to have never visited there.
Number 5 on this list is the pyramids. The Great Pyramids are located in Egypt and are some of the oldest structures on the entire planet. The pyramids are said to have been constructed over 4,500 years ago and were made to act as the burial grounds for the pharaohs of Egypt. The Great Pyramid, which is the biggest of all of them, is over 450 feet tall with a base of over 750 feet wide. That's a really big structure and acted as the largest structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years. It should also be noted that the pyramids are made up of massive stone blocks. For the Great Pyramid, it's estimated that 2.3 million stone blocks are what keep it standing to this day. Every block of the Great Pyramid also weighs approximately 2.5 to 15 tons. Just a reminder that a ton is 2,000 pounds, so there were some blocks that could have weighed close to 30,000 pounds. All of this is completely unbelievable. So unbelievable, in fact, that people think something else might have been at play in making them. It's currently believed that these were made by humans. It took thousands of humans to construct, but when you think about how monstrous these creations are and the technology that humans had back in that day, it becomes very hard to believe that we were capable of doing that. This has led people to the theory of aliens. These pyramids are also built to face the precise magnetic north, which makes people wonder how the ancient Egyptians could have possibly got that information. The theory is that these aliens came down and built the pyramids and the ancient Egyptians mistook them for gods. This is why in some ancient Egyptian drawings we see gods flying around. The Daily Star also reports the speed of light is 299,792,458 meters per second, and the geographic coordinates for the Great Pyramid coincide with that if you just move the decimal points over several spaces. They believe that this was a clue from the aliens for us to discover later. Frankly, as cool as aliens are, I would honestly rather believe that humans made the pyramids. It's pretty cool to know that almost 5,000 years ago, our species was able to make something like that. I feel like I have a little bit of pride for those ancient Egyptians. Number 4 on this list is the Bermuda Triangle. You've obviously heard about the Bermuda Triangle before and the lore that accompanies this extremely mysterious place. If you don't know what it is though, then the History Channel classifies it as a mythical section of the Atlantic Ocean roughly bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, where dozens of ships and airplanes have disappeared. These disappearances have continued to this day, but started hundreds of years ago. Basically since people started crossing over the Atlantic Ocean and records of ships were being kept. In fact, it's believed that William Shakespeare's The Tempest was based on a real shipwreck that happened at the Bermuda Triangle. So legends of this place can at least be dated back to when he wrote that play, which was in the early 1600s. In 1918, the legend of the Bermuda Triangle reached an all-time high when the USS Cyclops, a massive ship from the United States, sank to the bottom of the ocean. This ship was over 500 feet long and had over 300 people on board. It was a horrible catastrophe when it happened. What made this even more stupefying was that the ship had the capability to send out a distress signal and didn't do so, making everyone wonder what on earth happened. What has caused all these shipwrecks and plane crashes over the years is still unknown, but there are some theories. Some people believe that the Bermuda Triangle is home to a massive sea monster, potentially the Kraken or something like that. A massive tentacled monster with the ability to drag a ship down to the depths of the ocean and eat all who are on board. Some people believe that there may even be a wormhole that is out there in the middle of the ocean. A wormhole is a ripple through space-time which experts believe would act as a portal to another time and dimension. The Bermuda Triangle has also been called the Devil's Triangle before, indicating that some people believe this place could be the work of the devil or some strong sea demons out there. Nobody really knows the true cause of the Bermuda Triangle, and considering it's been talked about for hundreds of years, we may never know.
Number 3 on this list is the Coral Castle. The Coral Castle is a limestone structure located in Florida. It is super unique and has these strange limestone rocks that have been carved into various figures. Now there's nothing inherently cursed about this place. However, similar to the pyramids or Stonehenge that we covered in our last video, people wonder how on earth this place was made. Edward Leeds Scallon was a self-taught Russian engineer who came to America. He lived from 1887 to 1951 and is credited with being the creator of the Coral Castle. What's absolutely crazy about this story though, is he constructed the structure all by himself. This is what baffles people to this day. How on earth is it possible that one man in the early 1900s was capable of moving these limestones and carving them the way that they are single-handedly? These stones weigh thousands of pounds and there's no way that a man would ever be able to lift these things with sheer strength. Now he was an engineer and people have speculated that it was potentially the use of magnetism, something that he was fascinated with in his life. When asked how he was able to do this, he replied, "I understand the laws of weight and leverage and I know the secrets of the people who built the pyramids." This kind of makes sense, but with the pyramids they had thousands of people working on them all at once. You were only one man. People have theorized that Edward actually had some supernatural abilities that he was hiding from the public. This could honestly be believable because his personality was apparently extremely eccentric and very strange. However Edward was able to construct the Coral Castle, it truly is remarkable. Number 2 on this list is the oldest ghost story of all time. Ever wonder when all this started? When did humans start believing in ghosts, or when did we have our first encounter with a poltergeist? Well, a 3,500-year-old tablet may have the earliest depiction of a ghost as we know them today. This is a small tablet that was made in ancient Babylon and is considered by some experts to be one of the first, if not the first, written depiction of a ghost. The ghostly drawings could be easily missed and you have to really pay attention if you're going to see it. An expert on the subject, Irvin Finkel, says, "You'd probably never give it a second thought because the area where the drawings are looks like it's got no writing, but when you examine it and hold it under a lamp, those figures leap out at you across time in the most startling way." The tablet goes into detail on how to get rid of ghosts and calls for an exorcist. It explains how this exorcist must make figurines of a man and a woman and also speak the words of Mesopotamian god Shemesh to get rid of the ghost. There's also a warning to the reader to not turn around, potentially an indicator that a ghost could be behind you or you could risk getting sucked into the underworld if your focus isn't steady. This tablet also lists a bunch of materials that can be used in rituals and that can be used to prevent ghosts from appearing in the first place. This is super interesting because it means that ghosts and spirits visiting the living can be traced all the way back to the ancient Mesopotamians. We were having paranormal events happen to us thousands of years ago, and the action of exorcising demons and ghosts, it all started with these guys. One could argue that they were the founders and innovators of a lot of our ghostly practices and knowledge to this day. Number 1 on this list is Oak Island. Oak Island is a very mysterious island that has been shrouded in lore for years. It's a privately owned island off the south shore of Nova Scotia, Canada. It has so many rumors surrounding it that it's even got its own television show called The Curse of Oak Island that has 8 seasons under its belt. This is a reality television show by the History Channel where they explore the mysteries of Oak Island, and considering they're on season 8, it's fair to say that there have been quite a few mysteries. The one that's gained the most international fame though is the Money Pit. The Money Pit is supposedly a place on Oak Island where there's a plethora of buried treasure waiting for somebody to dig it up. This treasure was left by the pirate Captain William Kidd, who lived from 1645 to 1701. There's said to be vast riches here, however no one's been able to find it up until this point. This is largely because finding buried treasure can be extremely difficult, but also due to the curse that surrounds it. The curse that hovers over this treasure states that 7 men will die in search of the treasure before it's found. To this day, there have actually been 6 deaths associated with this buried treasure. That means that if one more person was to die whilst they're looking for it, then the treasure would either reveal itself, or the next person who goes looking for it would be the one who finds it. Problem with this is that there's one more person who needs to die, and I don't think that anyone wants to be that unlucky number 7. Other than this pirate treasure, there's also rumored to be some extremely valuable and mystical items here. Never before seen Shakespearean plays, the Holy Grail, and the Ark of the Covenant have all been linked to Oak Island. If searching for cursed treasure is your cup of tea, and this is definitely the place for you.